Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. You can find us on the web at hsstaffing.com. I hope you'll consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and professional writing needs. I am delighted that I will be joined by Barry Furey for a discussion on the current status of our emergency number 911. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits, as well as high-net-worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at info@pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Barry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure to be here, Bruce.
Well, please take a minute or two and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Oh, well, thank you. My name is Barry Furey. I am a third-generation public safety professional. My grandfather was a police officer. My father was a firefighter. And I've been involved in public safety since 1970. Was a fire officer in 3 different states and a 911 director in 4. Additionally, I've provided consulting services throughout my career, and that's what I do now in semi-retirement. And I've been involved in many statute-driven projects and certifications of 911 centers.
I would say that makes you qualified to discuss 911.
I hope so.
How did 911 get started?
It got started back in the 1960s as part of a lot of federal programs that were leaning towards judicial reform. Especially Crime Control Commission was very big back then, and it was decided that there needed to be a single number to contact law enforcement. That was the focus originally, was just law enforcement, similar to the 999 number that had been in service in Great Britain for decades before. And so 911 was picked mostly because there was no 911 area code in use in the country, nor was there a 911 telephone exchange to interfere with it. So it was put into service in 1968, and the first call came from a small town, Haleyville, Alabama.
And you know what the call was about?
I do not know. Well, initially, the first call was from, I believe, their city manager or mayor, just as a test, but I don't know any other particulars.
All righty. Now, when I call 911, which I've only done a couple of times, but when I call from home, the police will come, fire will come, ambulance will come in force. And I've never quite understood that. I called once and I said, there are 2 men trying to break into a car right across the street from me. The first question I was asked was, what was their race? I told the officer. And I said, they're either the worst thieves in the world, or the owner locked his keys in the car because they don't know what they're doing. And she laughed, and within a minute, there were 3 cruisers in front of me. Another time, I called because my next door neighbor was being beaten up by her boyfriend. And that took a little while for the police to come. A woman being beaten and a car being stolen, not exactly the same thing. And the response, I would have thought, would have been different. But I have no way of knowing what was going on at the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
How do you deal with the criticism of 911 and the response time?
Well, I think we need to break that down a little bit. When I first started, it was very simplistic in terms of call taking. Where are you? Who are you? What's the problem? Thanks. Since then, we have moved into a more scripted call taking arrangement where a number of questions are pre-formatted to elicit answers that work. I would call it a decision tree. So we get a more definitive idea of what's going on as resources are being spent. Now, in terms of response time, I think there are two things that we can look at here. Number one, and obviously, an in-progress call where there is the potential for physical damage, life and property, gets prioritized, and you're certainly right in that situation. But as you also indicated, you don't know what's going on at the time, and it's almost like an emergency room.
I was just writing down triage.
Yeah, you can, if you walk in with a hangnail and there's nobody waiting in the emergency room, you're going to get treated immediately. If you come in with two broken legs and there's just been a mass shooting, you're kind of going to the back of the queue. And so available resources in terms of police, fire, and EMS have a bearing. But recently, we're having the same problems with having sufficient resources at the 911 center to answer your call in a timely manner. And that's the new challenge that we're facing.
I actually was going to ask you about that, but I had a friend, just go back for a second, little humor about hospital triage. If you want to be taken first, you should be a woman in labor, asthmatic, and having a heart attack. You will then be taken first. I forget what he told me comes first, delivery of a baby or a heart attack. I think heart attack.
Heart attack.
Yeah, heart attack, but I wasn't positive. We've got this, which is now being done away with and forgotten, thankfully, of defund the police. And defunding the police doesn't only mean the cop on the beat, but I assume also meant 911 attendance.
Well, it can and it can't. And many, in fact, an increasing number of 911 centers are what they would call independent consolidated centers. And they are run either as their own entity. In fact, the center that I ran in Tennessee was independent from all the governments. It existed in Tennessee. There was an animal called an emergency communications district, just like you might have a fire district or a water district or sewer district. And we were not tied directly to any law enforcement agency, although we provided service to law enforcement agencies. But what you get in many communities is the kickback factor, is that people associate 911 with the police. And so you will have people who throw a broad net, cast a broad net, and all of that 911, that's part of police. Yeah, let's defund them as well.
I don't know the correct word, so you tell me. What is the correct term for the person who answers the phone when you dial 911? An officer, operator, what?
Well, number one, it depends upon where you are actually employed, what the local term is. But the general term that's been going now for a couple of decades is telecommunicator. And that refers to, because even within the 911 center, there can be several different positions. Many agencies, the same person takes the call and then dispatches it. Especially in larger agencies, there are call takers who take the call, and then there are dispatchers who actually send it out to the units that are responding. But telecommunicator is a pretty good term for anyone who works in a 911 center.
I'll use that term. most people don't think about it, but a telecommunicator goes through a bit of stress and trauma. There's a burglar in the house. I'm hiding in the closet. I'm 5 years old. I'm scared. My wife just went into labor. What do I do? Something good, something bad. How is the mental health of the 911 telecommunicators?
It is indeed a very stressful position. In fact, several years ago, a major university did a study that found that telecommunicators experience the same level of stress as people who are actually on the scene, because while not seeing it, they are hearing it. And in fact, they are hearing it before anybody gets there to render aid. So that's especially stressful. I've had many of those calls handled by centers that I've managed. I actually, when I was dispatching way back in the day, I dispatched a call that a good personal friend of mine was killed at as a first responder. So there's always out there. And I think with anything else, more people and more agencies are recognizing that fact. A state recently allowed telecommunications, for example, to take time off for essentially mental health reasons, which was not permitted before. So it's coming around, but it's very difficult in that if you take especially with the staffing situation in today's environment, if you take a very serious call, the thing really to do would be to kind of excuse yourself for a few minutes and go and try to get yourself together. But that potential is becoming less since we don't have enough people in the seats and the phones keep ringing. So the other part of it, besides the calls that you handle, is that the amount of overtime being worked now just leads to that. People are not getting sufficient breaks from sitting in that hot seat, so to speak.
Let's discuss idiots for a moment. I believe this actually happened. Someone called 911 because they ordered a meal and ketchup was missing or something was missing from it. Now, you got to be a complete moron to consider that to be an emergency. But is it illegal?
Well, it depends. 911, the National Emergency Number Association, uses the phrase "one nation, one number." But that's true, but it's also legislated by each state individually and delivered by about 6,000 911 centers across the country. And every one of them seems to have something a little different. States typically set legislation in terms of what is known as abuse of 911. And most of the time, calls like that are considered abuse of 911. Recently, I saw a situation where that exact same thing happened, and the police department went out there and arrested the caller because he had an outstanding warrant for murder. So I guess if you are wanted for an extreme felony, it's not a good idea to call the police to ask for an extra packet of ketchup.
That is truly a moron. Okay. Who was it? Jay Leno had stupid criminals.
Mm-hmm.
That would be one. I called 911. Excuse me. I did not call 911. I called the police department. Went online, got the number, called the police department, and I said, "Officer, I want to report that a deer is walking in front of my apartment." building. I've lived here 10 years. I've never seen a deer walk by before. And he goes, well, sir, the deers were here before we were. And I said, I appreciate that, but I was concerned that maybe there was a notice about a rabid animal, and I wanted to report it. And he was not amused. And I said, sir, I did not call 911. I didn't say this was an emergency. I'm merely trying to be a good citizen and to inform you of a problem that may or may not exist. And he apologized. All right. He was obviously having a bad day. He apologized. What's the line between the missing packet of ketchup and the attempted murder?
I will tell you that sometimes the definition of that line, again, goes back to the individual community in terms of what they think is right and what they think is a non-emergency. One of the big issues that we deal with are calls that are not emergencies. But one of the things that we as an industry have failed to do is to roll out the 311 non-emergency number nationwide. Some communities have it, other communities don't. And so when you are in a jurisdiction and you see something that maybe borderline, as you're saying, gee, is this the, where does this cross the line? 90% of the time, you are either going to call 911, and the other 10%, you're just going to forget about it and say, well, all right, that's probably not a big problem. I'll just let it ride. So we've done a great job. In fact, we've done too good a job over the years telling people, call 911. And in fact, in my younger days, when the system was not so pressed as it is now, we advocated telling people, look, if you're not sure whether it's an emergency or not, call 911 and we'll figure it out. We don't expect you to make those borderline decisions yourself. And you will find over the years that you'll have folks who call 911 and say, gee, I'm this really isn't an emergency, and then tell you the story, and it isn't. But you'll also have your 10-digit numbers, as you're saying, or you'll pick up a call and somebody's like, gee, I hate to bother you, but I just got shot 16 times. Could you maybe send an ambulance? So it's human nature. And what you think is an emergency may not be what I think is an emergency or what my next door neighbor thinks is an emergency. So, I mean, obviously, I guess the guidelines are if someone is going to potentially get hurt or somebody is already hurt, what's going on by the actions, if there's a fire, if somebody needs an ambulance for serious injury, then obviously you go ahead and call 911. From that point down, there are so many nuances that it's really hard to set a firm.
Do you know the story? And if you don't know it, then I will tell it, of the woman in Queens, New York? I'll take that as
I probably do, but go ahead.
Woman in Queens was being murdered. And
this is years ago?
Years ago. And she yelled, I can't remember. She yelled, help, help, help. Nobody dialed 911. When the police went around to investigate, they all said, well, we figured somebody else would call. And then the advice was given that if you are in danger, don't yell help, yell fire.
Fire.
Because everybody's afraid of fire. Now this is concerning me. You call 911, you say somebody's yelling fire, the fire department's going to come, the police are going to come, the ambulance is going to come. So whatever the problem is that you're facing will be solved. Is there a problem with that, or is that good advice? Because you're falsely reporting a fire, so to speak.
Yeah, the other part of that is that depending upon the jurisdiction and depending upon the nature of calls, police and ambulance may not come. So you may just wind up with a fire truck. So if somebody is actually physically assaulting you or has a weapon, basically you're just probably putting more unarmed people into danger. The opposite of what you're talking about is people not calling when they hear a cry for help, is what we see now due to the expansion of cell phones. Even the most minor call gets dozens of responses and reports. Just the other day, I saw 2 cars get into a very minor accident in a shopping center parking lot. So minor that if you weren't looking at the cars with a telescope, you wouldn't have seen anything. Both people got out of their cars, looked at their cars, and then simultaneously called 911. I'm not sure why. If you're calling, I don't need to call. They're going to come to the same place for the same call. So, yeah, I mean, the bottom line is the closer you come to knowing what's going on and reporting what's going on, the quicker you're going to get the appropriate help.
You just reminded me of another time I called 911. It was summer. I got out of my car and I looked in the back seat of the car next to me, and I saw a baby. Windows rolled up. We all no need to expand on that. And I called 911 and I said, "Can I break the windows?" And the woman said, "Please hold." And she said, "We can get somebody there in a minute. Does the baby look in distress?" "No, the baby's not crying." Well, get something. And in case the baby starts to cry, break the passenger side window in the front seat. The baby was in the rear behind the driver. So being the genius that I am, I then remembered I had the club. Remember the thing that locked the
yeah.
So I figured that would do it.
I'll do it.
And there was a gentleman who came over and he's like, "How can anybody responsible do this? The mother should be arrested. The father should be arrested." And I said, "You're stronger than I am. You hold the club. And if we have to, we break it." Officer arrived within a minute. He got out, he looked inside, and he said, "It's a doll." And we looked at him and said, "You're crazy. It's moving. My daughter has the same doll. It's a doll." And I agree with you. And the owner of the car came and was screaming at us that we were going to break her. That's a case where, you're doing the right thing. It's an honest mistake. The officer wasn't offended. The owner of the car, the woman, was an idiot. Not because of the doll, but because of her reaction. And, we just laughed at her and thanked the officers and left. There's an issue when there is sorry, I have a gentleman who thought I was talking to him. There's an issue of the cell phone, because you take out your cell phone, as you said. But does the technology of today help or hurt? You had said that there's a script. Well, if there's a script, can you have a chat bot ask those initial questions and then move it over to a human?
Well, interestingly enough, there are some centers right now looking at artificial intelligence to at least initially screen non-emergency calls to try to get them to the right agency. People, in my experience, like talking to a person right off the bat. You
Especially
get it
if you're scared.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you call your insurance company, you get annoyed going through that whole decision tree, trying to just say, "Hey, wait a minute, is the policy? I need to add another car on my policy." If your house is on fire, you want to hear a human voice right away that's going to do it. Now, like I said, we're reaching out and looking at AI. 911 texting has become a reality in many cities over the past few years. And again, that's a demand, like many of our demands, that's driven by personal electronics and conversation methods, communication methods. So that's now a reality in many places. But the bottom line still becomes that, like I said, a recent survey, 82% of 911 centers said they were understaffed. And I will tell you that number one is probably a small number. And number two, it doesn't rely on, most of the time, on any information on staffing that's backed by facts or formulas. We are terrible at doing salary and compensation and staffing studies by having the HR department call 4 or 5 similar agencies in the same region. Well, where did these people get their ideas on how many people they needed? They called you 3 or 4 years ago when they did it. So the same information is coming back. So people who are saying they're understaffed are understaffed by what they have on paper, not in reality. Go back to cell phones for a second. We used to, in fact, we still do, look at what are known as busy hour statistics. Okay, during what hours of the day did you have the most calls? That helps you determine staffing. What it doesn't take into effect is what I call busy minutes. If you get, again, a very visible accident, any type of fire that makes a smoke plume that people can see for a few miles, will generate most of the calls for that hour in a 2 or 3 minute period. And that creates an entirely different situation. Oh, we had 100 calls in an hour. It's a lot different than saying we had 78 calls in 2 minutes. And so we haven't really adjusted our staffing levels to deal with those situations. When I first joined public safety, our, quote, busy hours, you could predict they were Friday and Saturday nights, probably within an hour or two after the bars closed. That was it. That's when you had your peak. Since then, the last time when I was managing the center, I took a look at busy hours. It was afternoon drive time. We were taking cell phones again. People leaving work in a hurry to get home, running into each other. I mean, that's the equation. Those were the busiest hours right after people got from work because multiple calls from cell phones. Cell phones.
I made one phone call to 911 when I was driving. It was the first time it wasn't hands-free, and the telecommunicator was salivating. She was so happy to get the call. The driver beside me on my left, when I entered the roadway, was nursing her baby. And they said they'd been looking high and low for her. I said, don't worry, she's not going anywhere. And I asked if she wanted me to cut her off. And she said, no, don't do that. And then I realized it was stupid because the airbag could have deployed and then the baby would have died. But
Yeah.
by the time we got to a main street where there was a police station on the corner, there were 4 or 5 cruisers there. They wanted her very badly. In fact, they even let me make an illegal turn so I wouldn't be late for work.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. And not that, I'm not saying that it's all bad. I mean, before cell phones, if you needed assistance on a limited access highway or in a very remote area, you were out of luck until somebody came along that would go to a payphone back in the day and call the police or the fire or ambulance. But again, that has spun up to the fact that it's not unusual to get calls from someone who has passed the accident 5 minutes ago and suddenly gets a case of remorse. Gee, should I have called that in? And they'll be in another town by the time they call. Gee, I'm wondering if anybody called this. So you've got those collateral calls attached. And the biggest thing with cell phones is that we still can't 100% reliably pinpoint every 911 call we get from a cell phone. Whereas back in the day when a phone was something that was wired to your desk or kitchen wall, we knew where they were because the telephone company knew exactly where they put every one of their phones.
But the good thing about being able to text a 911 is if you're the child who's scared or the adult who's scared, you don't have to make any noise.
Yeah, exactly that. Plus, if you have any hearing loss or deafness,
didn't think of that.
That is a godsend.
Yeah.
If that is your situation. But yeah, you are correct. If you have a situation where somebody's hiding in a closet, wants to try to call 911 and not make a racket, best way to go.
Barry, I want to thank you. Before I let you go, I have one final question. I'm going to put up your contact information.
Sure.
Is there anything I didn't ask you which you wish I had asked you? And if I had asked you, what would you have said?
Well, I'm going to double underline the staffing issue right now at 911. I'm not trying to cause alarm or panic, but I have been in this business again over 50 years, and I have never seen the staffing at the critical level that it is right now. I think people need to understand in their own communities, if they call 911 and the phone rings and rings and rings, it is not somebody not doing their job. It's just that there are physically more calls than there are people.
Barry, I want to thank you profusely for coming on. I want to thank you for your service. And you have provided a lot of good information to our viewers. So I thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for having me.
I'm Bruce Hurwitz. Thank you for watching. And as always, please stay focused on success.